Because he's interested in Atlantis.
I really did not like the letter that they wrote to Netflix to try to get season 1 taken down of Ancient Apocalypse.
It's disgusting.
And they sometimes they'll rebuttal and say, oh, well, I never blatantly called him a racist. Like, well, okay, even if you didn't blatantly do it, you insinuated it, and you were okay with insinuating it. And some of these people exist in a realm where, in their little bubbles, where they throw around the word racist all the time. And then when they get to the wider world where the rest of us exist, they find out very quickly that we don't throw that term around lightly and accuse people of these things. And then, at the end of the podcast, when he said, you asked, things, the kind of temperature came down, and then I think maybe you asked something like, well, what can people do to help archaeology? And he was like, oh, well, you can donate to the SAA. Mm-hmm. But the SAA is the one that wrote the letter.
Right.
And it's like, man, that's just, it's not a good look.
Well, it's the real problem with human beings and ego when they have positions of power and authority. Especially over something that is very esoteric, and something that is and also completely complex. Mm-hmm. Like when you're dealing with trying to decipher hieroglyphs and then, the fact that we know that the Library of Alexandria was burned down, so who knows what was lost in that?
Several different times, like 5 different times.
God, I wonder if any of that just got stolen out of there, and then they blamed it on how much of that shit's in the Vatican?
The first time Caesar is chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean, and Pompey flees to Alexandria, and Alexandria was kind of in the basket of Rome. The Ptolemies, who are the Greek pharaohs in Egypt. So the Greeks are controlling Egypt after Alexander comes in 332 BC. So Alexander dies, his best friend Ptolemy becomes pharaoh. So, but the Ptolemies were very weak, not very good rulers, and so Rome kind of does like what the U.S. does, where they get pulled into conflicts, and then once they're there and they conquer everything, they seize all the power, And so Rome had done this to Egypt, and so they controlled Egypt, and they were pulling all of their they were keeping the Ptolemies in power, the Roman soldiers were, and they were pulling all that grain into Egypt. And so Caesar follows Pompey, chases him to Alexandria, and so that Pompey can't flee, Caesar says, we'll burn the docks. Well, when you landed in Alexandria, you would land at this dock that went to a road called Soma Road. So you had Soma Road and Canopic Way, and it was like the street corner. It must have been amazing to see in real life. Like, think about this. You have the Library of Alexandria. All this is all in one block. You have the Library of Alexandria. You have the Museon, which is right next to it. So both together, they make the world's first university. And I mean, you can just imagine like walking through those halls. Across the street from that is Alexander's mausoleum. So his mausoleum, we think the Emperor Hadrian, if you've heard of Hadrian before, that he modeled his mausoleum on Alexander's. So we kind of have an idea of like what the mausoleum may have looked like. And it would have a marble statue of Alexander on top. So people are walking by every day in the middle of this town. And then across the street from that is the palatial district where all the rich people lived. And then off by the bay, you would have had Cleopatra's palace. And so it's this beautiful place. But when the boats come into the dock, you had to give up all the scrolls that you had, because the Ptolemies are obsessed with obtaining the world's knowledge, and they want the originals. They don't want a copy. So what they would tell people is, you give us your writings, we'll write down a copy, and we'll give you back your original. But what they would do is give back the copy and keep the original. And this is something called the Library Wars. This is a whole thing. So, but it was connected to the docks. And so most of the buildings in Alexandria are made out of stone to prevent fires. But the interior of Alexandria's library would have had all these wooden shelves that would cross where you'd stack all the scrolls in. So everything maybe the actual structure of the building doesn't burn down, but the entire interior of it burns up. And so when Caesar sets fire to the docks to burn all of Pompey's ships, it crawls up the docks and burns the library down. Well, Augustus did the same thing. A decade and a half later, Augustus came and he seized Alexandria, and this is when Cleopatra and Mark Antony die. He seizes it, and then there are rebellions because the Alexandrians are very rebellious. They don't want to be ruled by the Romans, and so there's I think it's Caracalla that he was being made fun of by the Alexandrians. There was a theater in town. It's actually the place where stand-up comedy was invented, in Alexandria. Yeah, so
Really?
and the butt of all the jokes was always the Roman emperor. So you'd have people like talking shit about the Roman emperor standing up, in the middle of Alexandria's theater, and so the Roman emperor was always the butt of the joke. Well, Caracalla, I believe it's Caracalla, he's one of the brothers in Gladiator 2, the new Gladiator, if you've seen it.
I haven't seen it.
He's one of the brothers, but the movie doesn't really depict the actual emperors very accurately. But he gets tired of it, so he just comes down to Alexandria on like a royal visit and executes 25,000 people in the city of Alexandria and burns down parts of it. So he burned down the library for the third time. And then there was another emperor named Aurelian, when a local Alexandrian declared himself the new Egyptian pharaoh. I think he was a real Egyptian. He declared himself like the newest pharaoh, and he created this revolt, and then Aurelian had to come and put the revolt down, and he burned down the library again. So we're getting close to like 300 AD at this point. Now, in 365 AD, there was a huge earthquake that was off of the coast of Crete, I think, which is the most southern Greek isle. It's where the Minoans lived. I believe it's there, or it's off the coast of Cyprus. And so that earthquake just reverberates down to Egypt, and this massive tsunami destroys the entire city of Alexandria. And it said it was so catastrophic that I think it's Pliny the Elder or Pliny the Younger comes down in a rescue mission from Italy, and he comes to Alexandria, and he records that 50,000 people in the city are missing because of the wave that gets pushed in, and that all of the giant boats, these are gigantic boats in Alexandria's harbor, are sitting on top of all the rooftops in the city. And it's after this point that the location of Alexander's body and the location of Alexandria's library just completely go missing. So they're both utterly destroyed, and most likely all of the giant stones that were used to build the city were repurposed for other things. But in one fatal swoop, Alexandria's library, the Museon, and Alexander's mausoleum completely disappear from the historical record.
Wow. It just shows you how vulnerable knowledge is.
Mm-hmm.
I really think about that today because obviously we have a lot of books, and most things that are like most physics work, most work on archaeology, most work on history is available in book form. But how much of what we have is on hard drives? And if there was a power outage, just a global, worldwide power outage that lasted 6 months, we're fucked. We don't know anything anymore.
Yeah.
It's a small amount of time for an enormous cataclysmic disaster to completely erase tens of thousands of years of understanding of everything.
Yeah.
Everything. We would have no knowledge. One generation removed from electronics would have no knowledge of how to recreate it, what steps need to be taken, what you have to build a chip plant. Where are they right now? They're in Taiwan. What the fuck are you talking about? How are we going to do this? Hard drives?
That's a precarious place for them to be.
Starting from scratch today would be very similar, I think, to probably what starting from scratch was post the Great Flood, post the great comet impacts, all the Younger Dryas impact series stuff. Civilization, if that stuff is correct, if Graham's position and Randall Carlson's position is that there was probably a much more advanced civilization than just hunter-gatherers that lived 10,000 plus years ago. How many thousands of years would it take before we started calming down again? Well, it seems like it took about 4 or 5,000 years before civilization emerges.
A really long time.
A really long time.
I think about that with like foraging, I was reading, yesterday I was reading Exploration Fawcett. Have you ever read this before or listened to the audiobook? It's Percy
Fawcett's
personal diary. Yeah.
Oh,
so you have,
wow. There's an audiobook of that?
Yeah. It's on Audible. Yeah. Dude, you'll get wrapped up in it. You won't be able to stop listening to it. He just has these amazing experiences, and man, he would be like your best, like your all-time guest, if you could have him on.
Sure.
But
probably had a great accent too.
Yeah, for sure. And so you listen to his audiobook, and the way he talks about meeting the indigenous people that live deep in the Amazon. You know, it would take him weeks to get to these little villages. And while he was out there, he would see like the systematic mathematical structure with which they would set up these giant villages and how they would build these huge like thatch wood homes with foundations that are stones. And these people were, he said that they had like beautiful skin, they spoke elegantly, they sang songs. And he's like, this isn't, he's like, these people in the Amazon are not primitive savages like my colleagues at the Royal Geographic Society in London believe that they are. These are people who are the fallen, or are the descendants of a fallen great civilization. He was like, the way they interact with each other is so sophisticated, and the way they speak with each other.
Why did he think they were the descendants of a fallen civilization and not the people that were currently living in the most modern version of this civilization?
I don't quite know. You know, there's some things that are left out. Like he has some. Before he started writing this, I think he always had these ideas in the back of his mind. And so you don't really get the origin of why he initially started thinking this. But, you know, while he's exploring South America, he's hearing all these stories of you know, semi-contacted people. Like you have natives who still live the native life, but they can speak Spanish, and he could speak a little bit of Spanish and communicate with these people. So he would hear about, oh yeah, you know, there's this huge city of gold off in the jungle, months travel that way, and it's the same kind of legend that all these Spaniards had heard. So it's this idea of there was this civilization that used to be out there, and so Percy thought that maybe it has something to do with Atlantis.
This is what the Society for American Archaeology said in their open letter to Netflix. Complaining about my show. They said, we know that there was no lost civilization during the Ice Age. And my question to them is, how can they possibly know that when they've looked at relatively small areas of the Earth? The picture is not complete. They should be saying, we don't think there was a lost civilization during the Ice Age, fine. But to say we know there wasn't, that's completely wrong.
Well, it's silly, and it's also, it becomes more and more of a problem the more things get discovered. And the more they push back harder more emotionally and more religiously.
Yeah.
It's really kind of crazy the way they behave, that is as if they have like an accurate map. Yeah. Like the way they viewed some of the older hieroglyphs that depict civilizations that were 30,000 years ago, like kings and the lineage.
The king lists from ancient Egypt go back 30 plus thousand years.
But they want to pretend that those are myth.
Yeah, and yet, for their chronology of ancient Egypt, they actually use the king lists. The moment those king lists start giving dates that fall within dates that archaeologists like, everything before those dates, they say, oh, they just made it up.
How crazy is that? Wouldn't it be a fascinating alternative if you were an archaeologist to go, you know what? Maybe this king's list is legit. Maybe this thing really is 30, 40,000 years old. Yeah. And maybe that explains a lot. And now we have to figure out how. Yeah. How'd they do it?
It would be a fascinating alternative. But unfortunately, it's not the way that archaeology works at the moment. I repeat.
An example in Egypt.
Zahi is an excellent example.
He does not want to even entertain the notion that there's some sort of a gap in the knowledge of history.
If you just say the word Atlantis to Zahi Hawass, he goes berserk. He absolutely goes nuts. And that's irrational too, since we know that the Atlantis story comes from Plato. We know that Plato said the source of that story was in ancient Egypt, in the Temple of Neith at Sais in the Delta. An ancestor, Solon, visited that temple and was told the story, which he put into the word. Atlantis is not an ancient Egyptian word. That's one of the problems. But he called it Atlantis. But at Edfu in Upper Egypt, there's a whole story of a homeland of the primeval ones that was destroyed in a great cataclysm and flooded by the sea, leaving only a few survivors who traveled around the world seeking to restart civilization. It's told very clearly in the Edfu building texts, which fortunately have now been completely translated. Sadly, only into German. I hope we'll see the full English translation in due course. But the translations I was working from when I first studied them are very good, and they've been reinforced and supported by this new fuller translation. So I think the Atlantis story does have an ancient Egyptian origin, and I think the ancient Egyptians Egyptians should be proud of it rather than throwing it away. And also, archaeologists should not seek to isolate the story of Atlantis from other flood myths and traditions all around the world. And that's a problem too. I mean, we have hundreds of myths and traditions from countries all around the globe which speak of a great global cataclysm, a huge flood, often wildfires, destruction of human beings and of animals, a few survivors who seek to restart civilization. It's a global story, not a single story told by Plato.
And I mean, if you hear the same story from so many different cultures, at what point in time do you go, maybe there's something to this? I mean, it's just very strange to try to deny that.
Again, we have this...
Especially with the physical evidence.
Yeah, especially with the physical evidence. And it's interesting with the physical evidence, like Göbekli Tepe, which is 11,600 years old. I mean, it used to be argued, Robert Schoch and John Anthony West's work on the Great Sphinx, suggesting that the Sphinx could be 12,000 plus years old. It used to be argued that was impossible because there was no other site anywhere in the world, no other megalithic site of the same age. And then we discover Göbekli Tepe, and it's 11,600 years old. Now, if you can make Göbekli Tepe with its 20-ton megaliths, beautifully carved representations of human and animal figures in those pillars, if you can do that, you can cut the Great Sphinx out of bedrock as well. There's no reason to dismiss the geological evidence of the Great Sphinx anymore. But instead, what archaeology is doing is trying to finesse Göbekli Tepe. They're trying to say, oh, there was this gradual build-up to Göbekli Tepe. And they now talk about a people who they call the Natufians. Again, we don't know what they called themselves, who were predecessors of Göbekli Tepe around 14,000 years ago. And they show things that look like a tiny little stone wall that they built, the sort of thing that you can find, a dry stone wall that you can find anywhere in Wales to this day, you know. And this is supposed to be a prequel to Göbekli Tepe. I'm sorry, you just don't start off making dry stone walls and then wake up one morning and create 20-ton megaliths in huge stone circles, perfectly astronomically aligned, as we have at Göbekli Tepe.
Not only that, but how? Like, what did they do? Where are you getting those 20-ton megaliths from? How far do they have to transport?
In the case of Göbekli Tepe, not far.
How far?
Hundreds of meters. How do you have the organizational skills? Where do you have the mindset that plans something like this at the beginning? And that is the problem that is not answered in the case of Göbekli Tepe, that happening suddenly.
And what were they using for tools?
They're supposed to have just been using stone. There's not supposed to have been any metals at that period.
Not even brass.
Not even brass. Not even copper. I have a complicated view on Göbekli Tepe. Let's say it's my hypothesis. It's not a fact. I don't claim this is a fact. I think that what we're looking at Göbekli Tepe, there's no doubt that the population of around Göbekli Tepe were all hunter-gatherers when Göbekli Tepe started to be made. And that's the weirdest thing of all, because previously archaeology always used to say hunter-gatherer cultures did not have the manpower, did not have the organizational skills, could not generate the surpluses that would allow people to specialize in architecture and engineering and astronomy and so on. So it used to be said that hunter-gatherers couldn't do that. Now archaeologists have backpedaled on that and they're saying, well, yeah, clearly hunter-gatherers did it. The funny thing is that during the 1,000 years that Göbekli Tepe functions, and it runs from roughly 11,600 years ago to, say, 9,600 years ago, during the 10,600 years ago, during those 1,000 years, the population of Göbekli Tepe transitions from being hunter-gatherers to being agriculturalists. So we see two new ideas suddenly appearing at Göbekli Tepe: enormous megalithic architecture and a shift from hunter-gathering to agriculture. And what Göbekli Tepe looks like to me is a transfer of technology, that people who already knew how to work megalithic architecture and align it precisely to the risings of particular stars, for example, Sirius, came to Göbekli Tepe at a time of chaos and cataclysm in the world, and they sought to introduce a new way of thinking. I think Göbekli Tepe was created as a project to mobilize the local community, to give them something to work on, to bring them together. And it's not an accident that during that 1,000 years they transitioned from hunter-gathering to agriculture. I don't see massive technical complications in creating Göbekli Tepe, except those very precise alignments. But what I do see is a sudden appearance of something that shouldn't have been there, and that requires explanation.
Hey, woman, since your man ain't got no heart,
What you going to my apartment tonight? I'll show you a real man.
There you go.
What? Fuck you. Hey, woman. Since your man ain't got no heart, what you going to my apartment tonight? I'll show you a real man.
There you go.
What? Fuck you.
So the Atlantis one.
Yeah,
So
the Richat structure. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you saw those videos, Joe.
yeah, no, that was a big one that I saw because I've been fascinated by the concept of Atlantis. You know, ever since I had these conversations with Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock about the Younger Dryas impact theory and this concept that somewhere in the roughly around 11,000, 12,000 years ago, we were hit by a series of comets. And it's pretty evident that that's a fact. If you do the core samples of the Earth, they find this nuclear glass all over the Earth that exists in that time period. And it seems like something happened that reset civilization. And there's very little evidence of advanced civilizations before that up until recently, up until the last couple of decades. They started uncovering things like Göbekli Tepe and all these other structures that are clearly from more than 12,000 years ago. And they're really complex and really large with enormous stones. And it's sort of caused people to rethink the history of the Earth and the history of human civilizations. And Atlantis has always been the big one. That has been the one that everybody talked about, was this incredibly advanced civilization, and no one can figure out where it is
Right.
or if it was real.
I think that Atlantis, because surely that wouldn't have been necessarily the name just through like the change of language, you know, over, let's say, 12, 13,000 years ago, which would be the time frame. So like surely there would be several different changes of language, but I think it represented a civilization that was doing great things. They were more global than what many people think would be possible. Atlantis was said to be a kingdom made up of, or an empire, made up of 10 kingdoms. And then there was the lost city of Atlantis, which was the capital, which was said to be made up of concentric circles, 2 of water, 3 of land, and essentially that they were obliterated by a cataclysm as passed down by Plato, although it's worth mentioning that Plato got the story of Atlantis from Solon, who was his uncle separated by 6 generations. But what most people don't realize is that Solon had traveled to Egypt, and so it's the ancient Egyptians is where that tale comes from, which makes it even more bizarre because I would argue that the most spectacular ancient civilization is the Egyptians. I mean, no disrespect to the Romans.
Hard to deny.
Right? I mean, let me just say, because I want to, on this podcast, encourage people to travel to Egypt. Joe, you got to go.
I really want to. A friend of mine just went, and she got back, and she was telling me incredible things about it. Jamie, will you pull up the photos of these concentric circles? Tell him.
Yeah, the Richat, Richat. It's worth mentioning
he's
that.
got it already here.
Yeah, in the first couple, I just want to say it's Richat. I used to call it Richat. I was mispronouncing it. But let me ask you this, Joe, real quick. When you saw my video, was that the very first time you had ever seen this thing before?
Yeah.
That's the thing. So many. When I first saw this, I was like, what the fuck is that? By the way, you see that white, all those white blemishes? That's salt. This was under the ocean. And people, let me just say, you mentioned Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock. I love them. And I know for sure that they don't particularly think this is the site for a few different reasons. So let me say there's absolute doubt. Even I am not 100% certain. I'm not even 100% certain Atlantis existed. What I am certain is that humans were doing spectacular things and a cataclysmic event happened called the Younger Dryas and reset something for somebody.
Is there a natural explanation for this formation?
Yes. So let me say that it is considered to be mysterious. They're not 100% certain of it. However, the consensus is that it was a volcanic dome that had risen and collapsed multiple times, like 100 million years ago, allegedly. I say allegedly. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that. I'm just saying I would like to know where sometimes they get these figures from. Like, explain to me why it was 100 million years ago and not 99 or 98, because here we are talking about how crazy things changed in just the last 12, 13,000 years. So when they throw around these numbers, 1 million years in itself is an incredibly long period of time. But getting back to your question, some had originally thought that maybe it was an impact site from an asteroid or perhaps, but there's no evidence for it. Like there's none of the nano.
The problem is there's these concentric circles.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything. I mean, obviously I'm not an archaeologist, but I've never seen anything like this in I mean, if you study structures that are like man-made structures, I've never seen anything like this that humans have made, but I've definitely never seen like. Go to that one where your cursor's on, Jamie.
Please.
So is this?
You want to see some? All right.
What is
sorry.
this? What am I?
Okay.
Okay. One step at a time, because we also have to take into consideration that people are just listening. So kind of describe what we're looking at here.
Okay. So what you're looking at is approximately 250 miles inland in the total barren desert of Mauritania, Africa. So
but
the Western
this image
Sahara.
looks like. Why is it blue?
That's just showing you
What it used to look like?
No, this is what it looks like right now through, I forgot what you call this type of animation, but it's a satellite imagery that they enhanced in order for you to see the difference in elevation and the actual structure to itself.
Okay, so like if there was water in this area, you would see it this way, that it would be these concentric circles that are raised above the water, and then the water would be inside of it like that.
Well, just to clarify, this particular image, no, this is not trying to represent water. So that blue is actually picking up on salt. So
salt, all that was salt. But I mean, it used to be underwater, right? It's salt because it was underwater.
That's what I believe, and that's what makes the most sense to me. Others will disagree, and let me tell you why. It is currently 1,300 feet above sea level. It's 250 miles inland. And so some people say this was never under the ocean, at least not for the last tens of millions of years, is what the scientists claim. I argue that since the salt is still there, and not only that, Jamie, if you go to the other images that show you more of the white, the one that you were previously on, the one to the middle to the left, right there. So those areas with the most white blemishes happen to be the areas that are the lowest in elevation, which to me tells me that saltwater had settled there. But not only that, Joe, Atlantis was said to be, like we said, multiple rings of, water and land. However, it was said to open to the sea to the south. And what you're looking at here, the south, so this is oriented north, south, east, and west. What do you see to the south? And especially if we could get another...
This is a very flat area that looks like it's the lowest elevation. Like around it looks like it's higher. I mean, it's hard to tell from this image.
Jamie, will you Google map it? Just type in... even if you went to Mauritania, so you could see this from space. Astronauts use it as a locator, and they weren't really familiar or aware of it until the Gemini missions in the early 1960s. So if you if you just go to Google Earth, you'll be able to find this quite quickly. It stands out, and it's why they call it the Eye of Africa or the Eye of the Sahara. All right, so just pan out a little bit, and it'll provide us with keep going. All that white is salt. In fact, I have a friend, Josh Sigurdsson, that went out there and tasted that shit off the fucking ground. That's salt. Because a lot of people say, this was never under the ocean. And I'm like, all right, you see all that? Even Randall Carlson himself, which let me just say, he, for a few reasons, he favors the Azores. He doesn't think this is likely to be the location for a few reasons.
He favors what?
The Azores, the island chain, which would be, it's
And he thinks that was Atlantis?
To him, he's partial towards that. But so he analyzed this site, and you see all those striations, how it looks like the ocean, so that's all water erosion, Joe. And if you scroll in, so remember when Randall was on your show and he showed you the Missoula floodplains and all those giant ripples from the huge current that it went through? This is here. So scroll in, right there where your cursor is, Jamie. Scroll right in. You're going to see those same water ripples. Keep going, because this is what you're looking at here is panned out. This is many miles. Like, keep in mind, this structure is 30 miles across.
That's crazy. That looks like the bottom of the ocean, like if you see where the water breaks on the sand.
Yep. And I have
that's
better
crazy.
pictures. And that, just to clarify, that white is salt. And that is because that's a lot of people don't know, Joe, that the Sahara Desert wasn't a thing until approximately 5,000 years ago. It's only in the last several years, and by the way, I'm quoting MIT research here, that the Sahara goes back and forth from green to desert approximately every 20,000 years. They believe it has something to do with the Earth's tilt, and that's worth discussing. But so this whole area, because people are like, well, that's not Atlantis. I'm like, well, first of all, if the Sahara Desert was a lush green tropical paradise, which had the largest known freshwater lakes ever known to have existed, for example, Mega Lake Chad, it's like 3 times more water surface than all of the North American Great Lakes combined. It's a big sucker.
Holy shit. How's it not an ocean?
I know.
It's all fresh water?
It was when it existed, and that was at the time when the Sahara was green. And it also had some of the largest known rivers were known to have existed throughout the world. I think they'd still be ranked 10th today or something like that. But so you have to, when you see this, people have to imagine that this area was once green, and that because one of the arguments I make is that the fact that that salt is on top of that dirt, to me, is indicative that the ocean flowed over here far more recently than what people think.
How wide is this structure?
Okay, so
these concentric circles.
I meant to bring. I brought a laser. Do you have a laser pointer in here?
No.
It's okay. So the circles themselves is about 14.5 miles across. However, if you go the complete shebang, the whole circle itself is just shy of 30 miles.
So the whole thing is 30 miles, which would be like the size of a city.
Right. Well, keep in mind the outer ring would have been water, so that wouldn't have necessarily counted. But some people will say that this is too big according to Plato's description. And let me just say that I'm like, well, hold on a second. I don't think that we should consider that, because of loss of translation, that we should consider the measurements a key detail. The question becomes, is it big enough to be a city with possibly millions of people? Because the way it was described is that it was a city that was said to be busy all day, all night, rich in trade, with languages spoken from all over. So I'm like, okay, that would imply millions of people. I mean, if a city's busy all day and all night, I think of large metropolitan areas like New York, Chicago, London, whatever. And so if this was indeed an ancient or a site of an ancient civilization, well, then it would have. I mean, they're obviously not going to have skyscrapers, so it would have to be an area big enough to sustain that many people, and the Richat structure certainly does.
And so the idea would be that this would lead out to the ocean, and that these circles would be where the water is, and then the ridges would be where the structures are, where the houses and the buildings are.
And people will say, well, where is that stuff now? I'm like, well, look at it. It got
those
obliterated.
Those people should shut the fuck up.
well,
but if you just look at what's going on with the sand and those clear water erosion marks on the sand, but that also could be wind, right? Couldn't the way that the ripples in that sand, couldn't that be wind?
Both. However, just to clarify.
Is that sand that is where the cursor's at right there?
Yes, that's all sand. However, it's also actually to the right where it says layers, Jamie. Can you scroll in right there? Because that will show you the ripples more. So it's a combination of sand and rock.
You mean to the left?
Right there. That's what I'm talking about. Those are giant ripples. And I'm quoting. Let me just say, I'm quoting Randall Carlson, who I consider to be an expert on geological formations. And so, yeah.
Right, but isn't that what wind-driven sand looks like? If you go to dunes look like that.
Yeah, and undoubtedly.
But hold on, this is sand, right?
Yes, well, it's combination, rock and sand in between.
Right, but this is like what it would look like if wind-driven sand and rock underneath it.
Right, so what the implication is that it was blasted by water, and then after that, the wind has done its thing and moved the sand all over it and in between.
So 20,000 years ago, this was all green, lush forest?
No, Joe. 5,000.
5,000?
So
really?
Yes. So I could show you.
When did they think Atlantis was?
11,600 is allegedly when it was destroyed, which mirrors the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe. Because so Plato so this is 600 BC, and Plato said that it happened 9,000 years earlier. So that would be 11,600 years ago, which coincides with the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, which makes it so compelling. To me, that is actual scientific evidence that indicates that Atlantis actually existed. Because it's very specific.
It is very specific, but it's not scientific, right? It's like there's no real evidence.
Okay, let me rephrase. That a civilization, let me rephrase. A civilization got fucked.
Yeah.
11,600. So never mind Atlantis. Let me rephrase. A civilization was around. The stories of it were passed down, and they got obliterated. So that's what I'm implying.
Well, we definitely know that the Younger Dryas impact theory is extremely plausible. There are, without a doubt, like many impact points on Earth where they find this tritonite, this nuclear glass, which you can get either from a nuclear explosion or you get it from some sort of a meteor impact, large scale, all over the continent. And we know that all over the planet, I should say. We know that happened. This is like real hardcore geological evidence. So if we know that there were structures before that, which we do now because of Göbekli Tepe and a few other places that they're reasonably sure were pre 11,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, then we know that something was around back then that was very sophisticated. How sophisticated, we don't know. whatever.
No, I was going to say something that you mentioned about the origin of, I guess, Plato's description. You said it was mud and grasses was like the aftermath. It's interesting. It's the topic I've been exploring recently. Is that does match some of the translations of origin stories from the ancient Egyptians. So it's like that the Temple of Horus at Edfu. It's this amazing structure, but it's literally covered head to toe in hieroglyphs and descriptions and all these types of things. But one of the stories in the translations they do talk about is this, what they would call the original point, or the primordial mound, the primordial island. They describe it as being an island that was surrounded by water that was sinking, and essentially these reeds that were growing on it that created a falcon's perch, and then the god, it was either Horus or Hurun, one of the falcon gods, alights on this perch and then gains divinity. But as part of that story, I mean, they and then he goes and forms Kemet, essentially the motherland Egypt, and it's this tale of them, I guess, their civilization moving and migrating to this new land. But they do talk about a whole stack of unknown gods and a whole culture that existed before that. It's an interesting correlation. It's something that Graham Hancock speculated about in his work with the Temple of Horus at Edfu. You know, they also have, you know, catastrophic flood myths and things like this. But it may be that whatever prior civilization, and that's might have been where the dynastic Egyptians actually got their origins from, because it seems clear that they've inherited some things from the past. That's a story they themselves tell.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that the story of Atlantis had come from Egypt.
That's one of the most bizarre parts about it. I didn't know this until just a few years ago either. It's like, oh, wait a second. Plato, his distant relative Solon had traveled there in search of knowledge because Egypt was the place to go for it. And
it was the priests of the Delta that told Solon. And they said that, so 6,000 years, or 9,000 years, prior to the time of Solon was when the sinking of this city happened. And that works out to be 9,600 BC, so 11,600 years ago, which is bang on exactly where now the geological evidence points to basically the end of the Younger Dryas cataclysms. Like we know something happened at the start at like 12,800, 900 years, and then 11,600 years ago was that end of the Younger Dryas that brought us up out of the cold spell and into the Holocene.
Isn't it crazy that that's a full 1,000 years, and we think about it in like the same time period? Like, yeah, I mean, around that time.
I know, just
we're
playing around with it.
literally 11,600 to 12,800. We're literally talking about 1,000 fucking years.
It is.
It's so much time.
It's so much time that actually, if you go from 12,008, so basically, let's say 1,200 years. The English language, Old English, is only like 1,400 years, and Modern English is only like 400 or 500 years. So this is such a wide, a long period of time that we weren't even speaking the same language that in that same 1,000 years ago. When you think of it like that, it's
nuts.
A different world.
It's nuts. And if you think about the people that lived 1,000 years ago and how they lived, all of this that I've learned from Graham Hancock and from Randall Carlson and from you guys, all of it is so astonishing, and it all fits into place. It all makes sense. Like, why are we so fucked up? Like, why is civilization so wacky? Why do we have these weird structures that no one can really explain? And when you think about the fact that there's so much evidence that we were hit by comets, that we were hit by large objects. Like, I didn't know about that enormous crater that's in Antarctica.
Oh, yes. I don't know all the details on how old that one's supposed to be, but it's one of the largest, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a big one in Antarctica. I don't know that much about it, but another one that have you heard of Göbekli Crater? That's another one?
Yes.
Yeah, Göbekli Crater, like the 20-mile hole in the bottom of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And when is that supposed to be from?
That was 5,000 years ago. They've dated that. It's something plopped down in the Indian Ocean, and it washed up these mega tsunamis on the coast of Madagascar and Western Australia that we can see in satellite images today. These got these like 500-600 foot high chevrons from where the water went miles inland, and they found organic material from the seabed in these chevrons, and then they date that with carbon-14 dating, and they put it right at 5,000 years ago, so 2,500 around that time BC, which is actually a really interesting date when you consider some of the, I guess, the publications that we rely on in our modern civilization today. The Bible, the Old Testament, wasn't written long after that, and if you think about where the Indian Ocean is, that could have been the source of the biblical flood. Like that would have washed up north into the Persian Gulf, flooded the hell out of that whole region.
It's just crazy that it's happened so many times.
That's what they say.
We like to think of history as being this linear thing. We started out as cave people,
That's
and then
right.
we branched out from Africa all across the world,
And that's the end of it.
kept learning. And here we are today with cell phones. But no, we've been rocked like multiple
Many
times, many times, and there's real solid evidence. The Antarctica one, how old do they think that is?
I don't recall on that. I have to double check that. I'd have to do a Google, Jamie.
Yeah.
So researchers have discovered a crater 1.5 kilometers beneath the Antarctica ice crust, 482 kilometers
Okay.
in diameter. 482 kilometers in
Yeah.
diameter. Holy shit.
What is that to
Probably
miles?
dates back to a meteorite impact 250 million years ago.
That's
Wow. Okay, so that's an old one.
That's like an order of magnitude bigger than anything related, even with the younger dry. I mean, that's
Bigger than the dinosaur one, right?
yeah, that's like
It's-
a 99 point whatever percent extinction event.
So it's
something
just
that
it
big.
just keeps happening. The Earth just over millions and millions of years and thousands of years that humans have been around.
Does.
The Earth just keeps getting whacked.
The evidence is so overwhelming. In say going back to the younger, driest period of time, there's evidence when you say get whacked. More than 30% of all landmass at that time was charred, burned. They claim that it's more fires than existed in the time of the dinosaurs. Now, I don't know if that's an article I read on Science Alert. I don't know if they can truly prove that, but if nothing else, 30% of all landmass existing today was burned and scorched to death at that period of time. That like helps people to wrap their heads around like this. The world was on fire.
Yeah, that's the younger driest mat. They estimate as part of the burning, and because there was floods and fire, and this correlates to a lot of origin myths from cultures all around the world. But yeah, 10% of the biomass, I think, so 9 to 10% of the, which is an inconceivable number. That's how much of the world was burnt, and that's now embedded in this black
10% of the biomass.
Yeah.
It's so crazy that there's like literally a dark line
Yeah, in the ground.
in the ground that shows where everything was on fire for a long fucking time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
Crazy.
we barely survived it. There's actually we now have a correlation of not only population reduction but a significant drop in like genetic diversity as a result. Like it's tied to the younger dryas. There's been a few good studies recently done at that. So we were one of the megafauna that the 50% of megafauna at the time that actually survived and got through that event.
How do they think people survived? Is there any speculation?
It-
And where did we survive? Like, where was the good spot?
I think caves. I think a lot of it would have been underground, and I think they may have even known. Like I think there's some evidence to suggest that some of these, like Derinkuyu in Turkey, in the Cappadocia region, could host tens of thousands of people. There's massive labyrinths all over Egypt, beneath Saqqara. There's miles and miles of tunnels and catacombs. I've been down into a bunch of them.
Now, I know that Jimmy has looked at that. Yeah, and I don't know Jimmy personally. I like the guy without knowing him. You interviewed him, right?
Very nice guy.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. I'd like to get him out in the field with me and show him some stuff firsthand. I think
I bet he would love that.
I think
he's
he
a
would.
giant fan of your work.
I like to hear that. Well, I'm a fan of his work, but I don't happen to agree on this one.
Well, I mean, I don't even know if he agrees. I think he's just speculating.
Yeah.
He's not dogmatic. Like, he doesn't have like
Right.
a rigid perspective on this.
Yeah, here you can see there's the Richat structure. What is interesting, though, is look at this. You've got this structure up here, the tenoma. I forget how you pronounce
say that?
I knew how to pronounce it, but anyways, that's an impact crater there. There's one here. We can actually, if we go back, the Tenumer crater in Mauritania, that's impact, and the Temimichat.
That's it.
So what's interesting, though, check this out. There's one, there's two, and here's the Richat structure. They fall in a perfect alignment. Now, what's the explanation there? I don't know.
Could just be coincidence, right?
Could be coincidence, yeah. It could be coincidence.
One of the things that he said about the Richat structure was that around it, the white appears to be salt.
Which could be. And I mean, see, the rim rock of this is late Cretaceous, about 90 million years old. So at that point, it was below the ocean, right? So it's been uplifted. I think this thing is about 1,400 or 1,500 feet above sea level, if memory serves me correct. So it's been eroded. You see, this whole thing here is like an erosion. You had a massive amount of water that came down over this, and most likely is what exposed this thing to the surface. It was probably buried. Let's see here. So right there is, from Plato, that's the ringed city of Atlantis to
Right.
scale.
The concentric rings.
The concentric ring. So this is the actual scale superimposed onto the Richat structure.
So it's much smaller
Much
in
smaller.
scale.
Yeah.
But Plato's scale was based on what?
the stade. It was based on the stade, which is roughly 607 feet. It's where we get the word stadium from.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because that was the length of a stadium in ancient Greece.
So when you look at Plato's version of this, sorry to take you on this detour, but I was just curious. When you look at Plato's version of Atlantis, is there an area of the world that seems likely? Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. You better watch my 6-hour presentation, Joe.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, no, but I look, it's detailed. That's why even in 6 hours, I can't really spell it. In my podcast I did, the first 9 episodes, 2 hours each, were devoted to, I thought, well, let's kick it off with Atlantis.
18 hours of Atlantis.
18 hours of it. The last episode 9 was devoted to the Richat structure.
Wow.
So I had eight hours, so 16 hours, but we had some chatter and things like that in there, so maybe more like 12 or 14 hours. So you know who Johanna James is?
No.
She is a British actress who started doing this She's a really cool lady. She's very interested in all this kind of stuff. Very smart, extraordinarily beautiful. And she went on and did she does these like 20-minute, 30-minute little vignettes of things that she's really interested in, having to do a lot with, ancient cultures, all the kind of things that, Graham Hancock is, she reads Graham Hancock. She became a fan of mine, and she devoted one of her little 20 or 30-minute segments to, she said, I watched all 10 hours or 12 hours of Randall Carlson's programs on Atlantis. And so she did this like 30-minute little synopsis of it. Really did a great job. So we reached out to her. I invited her on. She came on. We did a live stream a couple of weeks ago with her as a guest. And just really fun lady. She's also does comedy.
Really?
Yeah. And she's very intelligent, very gorgeous. What can I say? And smart and interested in all this kind of stuff. So, there we go. Anyways, so she was very interested in the whole Atlantis thing. And so because of that, there was a lot of feedback and people wanting to know more. And so I thought, okay, now the 10 or 12 hours I did, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to condense that down. So a couple of weeks ago, we did the first 3-hour live stream where I basically started breaking down Plato's account line by line. What did he actually say? Let's look at the geology. Let's look at the geography, the oceanography, the astronomy, and see if it lines up, if it matches up. And so I think there's one place that pretty much is not all the details, but when you look at all of the areas around the planet that have been proposed for Atlantis, I think there's one place that fits the majority of his details, and that's the sunken Azores plateau. And I say sunken because we know it's sunken, and it's right along the mid-Atlantic ridge. In fact, since we're on this subject, and I wasn't even thinking we'd get on this subject, there's the Azores Plateau right there. It straddles a triple plate junction, which you have the European plate, the African plate, and the North American plate here.
Well, it's up near Nova Scotia?
Yeah, it's far north. It is. But notice over here, it's really almost at the same latitude as Spain. See? And I would say that if there's any place on the planet that is most consistent with Plato's account, that's it right there.
Why is that? Without doing an 18-hour presentation.
Oh, come on, Joe. Can't we have pizza brought in?
We can.
Nah, that's why, in a nutshell, God, where do I even begin? So, I was afraid you were going to ask that, but we can look very quickly, I guess, like give you the 5-minute version, which is that there is evidence that there was a massive subsidence along the mid-Atlantic ridge. We actually talked about this a little bit, and I think in our very first discussion we had, which was what, 7-8 years ago?
At least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit. Geophysics shows that there's horizontal movement, lateral movement of the Earth's crust because of continental drift, but there's also vertical movement. And that is the result of isostatic compensation. That's called isostasy, is the vertical movement of the Earth's crust. I can show you, I should have a slide right here that will help to really illustrate what it is. Let me back up to, let's see. Should be right in here. Here we go. Okay, so now this is the shore of Hudson Bay. Now this is where the ice sheet was the thickest, right? Now what are you seeing there? Hudson Bay is up here. These are shorelines because when the ice was removed, the land started rising back. So here's sea level, land is rising back.
And the land is rising because of a lack of weight of the ice?
Yes, right. So you're sitting on a soft, cushiony chair right now, right? Are you?
Yep.
Okay, so your ass is causing isostatic depression of that cushion on your chair.
Right. When I lift
And if you sit up,
yeah,
you'll have isostatic compensation. Right?
So that's what that is along many, many, many lines.
Yes, those are all shorelines. Here's another view of it.
Wow.
Here's another view.
Wow.
That's the land rebounding a couple of thousand feet after the ice was removed. Now, the ice was removed, and all of those trillions of tons of weight, where did it go? In the Atlantic Ocean. Now, you look, the thinnest crust on the Earth is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And if you look at it, you'll see that there are transform faults, which should show up right here. The transform faults are these vertical fault lines that are what you would say orthogonal or at right angles to the ridge itself. Here you can see very clearly the triple plate junction and how the Azores plateau. Okay, well, since the 1940s, the first expedition in 1948, there was when they started doing dredge samples from the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, which coincidentally, the name of the ship was the Atlantis. They dredge core samples, and they pull up the core samples from 2 miles down, a mile to 2 miles down, and they look at those core samples. And what you had was, for example, shallow water creatures living. They weren't living. They were now, they had been drowned. You had creatures like that typically lived under 100 feet of seawater. And now they're a mile and a half below. And they're on the flanks of this place right here.
So these are fossils that they're finding?
Yes.
And they're finding fossils that ordinarily you would find in some place that was very shallow.
Very shallow. Very shallow, yes.
Or relatively shallow, 100 feet.
100 feet, yes. So this is the basic idea here. This goes back to the 60s. As it says right here, the possible tectonic implications of glacial-eustatic. Now, eustatic is the rise and fall of sea level correlated with the increase and decrease of glacial ice. So if the ice is increasing, sea level is falling, and we call that eustatic sea level fall. If the ice is shrinking, melting, sea level's rising. So that's a eustatic rise. So that's the meaning of that. When you see glacial-eustatic, that means the rise and fall of the sea level as a result of glacier growth or melting. Okay? And it says here, sea level fluctuations have received only minor attention in connection with such problems as ocean floor spreading. The purpose of this report is to point out that late Pleistocene sea level data suggest that the ocean basins have responded isostatically and by a significant amount, particularly concentrated along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. I've got so much here. I'm just going to grab a couple of these things here. Yeah. So they dug up these cobbles, which are, the cobbles are, so a cobble is basically a stone or anything that's lithified that's roughly between a pebble and a boulder. A boulder, when you get, I think, to 11 inches, about the size of a volleyball, now you're in the realm of boulders. A cobble is in between pebbles and boulders, like you've heard of cobblestone streets, they're fist-sized rocks, basically. So they say here, the Atlantis cruiser and great meteor seamounts rise from a broad ridge or plateau, which extends from the mid-Atlantic ridge, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. So about a ton of flat pteropod limestone cobbles was dredged from the summit area of one of these sunken, what they're calling the seamounts. And a seamount is like a flat-topped mountain, right? Like the top of the mountain has been sheared off, okay? So they pulled up these limestones, right? These limestone cobbles. They dated them. One of the cobbles gave an apparent radiocarbon age of 12,000 years, plus or minus 900 years. The state of lithification, how much it is turned into rock, of the limestone suggests that it may have been lithified under subaerial conditions. In other words, in the atmosphere. That's what that means. It may have been lithified under subaerial conditions, and the seamount may have been an island within the past 12,000 years.
Wow.
So, I mean, we could go through, again, hours of this kind of research. And why it's been pushed off to the side is anybody's guess. But it just doesn't fit the paradigm. But, yeah, basically, now this doesn't prove that there was any civilization there, but we can make a very strong case that a large section of the Azores Plateau was above sea level during the late glacial maximum.
Does it coincide with Plato's account of trade and of travel and of the way?
Well, we have no way of knowing. See, now there we have to make a leap of faith, which is this. If we look right here, you'll see, you can see it very clearly, and you can see the Straits of Gibraltar here, which was anciently known as the Pillars of Heracles. And you come here to a group of islands, and then you get to the Azores Plateau. And here, these down here are those seamounts, those truncated seamounts. So really all you have to do, here's the leap of faith you have to make. You have to go, now I don't get into anything like, whatever, flying spaceships or crystal ray guns or anything like that. No, I just go by what Plato says. What he's describing is a maritime culture that had navigational abilities. Something along the lines of the Minoan or the Phoenician culture, maybe by an order of magnitude, right? So now all we have to do really is assume this, which to me is not so pseudoscientific that we couldn't even consider it, which is that some group in the Ice Age had enough navigational skills to sail from Europe to islands right here.
Ruby Ridge, by the way, is seen as a success by the FBI.
Which is crazy.
Which is fucking bananas.
Tell people if they don't know what Ruby Ridge was. Tell them the story behind it.
So Randy Weaver, a Green Beret from Vietnam, shacks up in rural Idaho, and he decides that he wants to have a life off-grid. And the FBI, doing an investigation with the ATF, finds out that he has some kind of gun issue, and they need to do an investigation, and they need to go on site. But this is almost, it's crazy because there's similarities with our situation. You find out the guy's background. Like if you're developing a target packet on a bad guy, you would want to know the guy's background, right? That's the first thing you do because you want to assess potential risk to force, and you want to mitigate risk overall. What's his background? Green Beret. Vietnam. Oh, fuck. Right? Then everybody gets all fucking crazy, right? They start going, oh, we need to find out more. So they do surveillance. They don't just do off-site surveillance. They don't do long-range surveillance. They get in ghillie suits and low crawl to his fucking cabin, right? In ghillie suits. His son and his dog are out on the property because it's his fucking property, and they discover these guys in ghillie suits. The son raises his rifle, shoots and kills one of the FBI guys, and the FBI guys kill his son. So what would you do if you own property in rural anywhere in America, you hear gunshots, and your fucking son's dead, and you don't know what's going on? And it's a bunch of dudes in ghillie suits. So he winds up locking himself and barricading himself in the cabin, and then they deploy the FBI Hostage Rescue Team, HRT. I actually interviewed one of the guys that was he was in the sniper site as a sniper for FBI HRT when this went down. So long story short, they kill his wife as well. shoot his wife
while she was holding a baby.
They think talking to one of the snipers. They thought that he was charging them into their position, but he was fake charging. Like he was making like a gesture like he was charging. So they got panicky and they started breaking shots off at him. I don't know if they wounded him, maybe wounded him, but he gets back inside, and so they dump the next person they saw, which happened to be the wife. So they end up barricading the place even more, and his ex-commander is the one that basically does a call out and gets him to negotiate and then eventually gets him to surrender. So all this is said and done, the FBI is found in the wrong. They sue the FBI, they win. It's a insanely controversial topic, but if you look at the FBI, two of the successes, I mean, there was guys who got awards from the FBI on that fucking mission. Like,
even though it was proven that they were in the wrong.
Yeah, even though it's proven they were in the wrong. Like Waco is a good example of it as well. But this is what I'm talking about. Like there's a breakdown between organizations in the government and their powers that be, and likely a cascade, a tipping point of mistakes that cascaded into the catastrophe that it was. But that's the problem. I mean, we're seeing those things now. Like, what I do with my business in a free society is none of your fucking business.